opposed to just going through the text. That's by popular request. But the first few sessions will be sort of introductory in nature, particularly this one. Between Pshat and Midrash, what is wrong with the way we teach Torah text? And this is something I know you've heard from me before that I feel very strongly about. I feel that the way we teach our children text is just problematic. And I'll explain what I mean as we go through the texts in front of us. The first text is a section of the Rambam. It's from his introduction to a portion of the Talmud Sanhedrin. And this section, known as Chelek, basically has a great number of very difficult midrashim. Very, very difficult to understand and to try to contemplate what they're saying. And it is here that the Rambam basically turns to us and says, I want you to understand how I think Midrash is supposed to be approached. And he says there are three groups of people. Hakat HaRishona, he says, the first group, Heim Rabim Mimashero Isi v'Shamati Mehem. They are very many in number in this first group, from what I've seen and what I've experienced and what I've heard. V'Heim Kol Osam Anashim Asher Ro'u Divrei Chachomim. They are basically people who see Midrash and understand it kipshutan, understand it as it is, basically. And and they don't look for anything further than the actual text. And the problem is, he says, that with this group, is that ultimately they find Midrash to be not understandable and negative. They basically say the rabbis are fantasizing. And therefore, this particular group falls into a trap and is unable to really understand the beauty of Midrash. Hakana Shniya, the second group, he says, this is a group that is also plentiful. He says there are many of those that are in this group. They take Midrash literally, which leads to absurdities, he says. Basically, they take Midrash literally. They don't necessarily understand what the text is really saying, and therefore they see the Pshat of the Midrash, and that's what they take, and therefore they will fall astray as well. And finally, he says the third group. The third group, and he bemoans this fact, he says the third group isn't as many. I've only met a few people who really do this, he says. The third group is the group that understands that Midrash is to be understood on multiple levels, that the surface level of a Midrash is not what the rabbis want you to accept. What they want you to accept, he says, is that which is underneath, that which motivates the story, and what is the lesson that they are trying to teach. That is how you are meant to understand Midrash. And he says, this is the group that I find myself in. This is the group that I wish there were more of. And this is the way Midrash must be understood. Now, I'm sharing this with you because, as I've said, I believe we fail to teach Midrash properly and we fail to teach Pshat properly. What happens in our schools generally is, and in many of our teachings, is right off the bat, as soon as we start, we move to Midrash. And we teach Midrash as if it's text. And if you talk to children learning in school today, and you talk to them, for example, about the story of Yosef and his brothers, they'll tell you that the brothers made a Bezdin, and they made a Bezdin, and they checked him, and that's what happened, and they went through a process, and they're saying this as if it's written in the text, and it's not. So much of what they quote is simply not in the Chumash, simply not there. And because of that, they fail to understand Midrash and fail to understand Pshat. And Pshat really has a lot to say. Pshat is beautiful. And too often they don't even learn the Pshat. Yes.
We're going to discuss the role of Rashi, because Rashi really crowned
Okay.
Midrash.
Right. Okay. So we'll talk.
Made it
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. Rashi, it's very interesting. Rashi tries to stick to the text, but periodically when he finds himself stuck, he will go to Midrash, and as if it's the way to learn. His grandson, the Rashbam, who I've told you is my favorite classical commentary because he believes in Pshat, says that his grandfather said at the end of his life that if he would have written again, he would have stayed closer to Pshat. So, but it's true. We'll see in a couple of cases here where Rashi does go to Midrash, and I understand it because he has trouble finding a way to approach the Pshat. All right, now, we're going to take a look at a number of examples of Midrash and Pshat. We'll try to understand both the Midrash and the Pshat. The first example actually is an example that, for me, was very telling because I dealt with it in Yeshiva University when I was teaching a class. I taught classes there in Chumash. And I was in the JSS program, which that's what it was called then, which is a program for people from not a strong background, and sort of an outreach program, but it was also for failed yeshiva students who somehow didn't want to go mainstream and wanted to take the easy route. And we were dealing with Parshas Bereshis appropriately. And I got to the point where we were dealing with the fourth day and the creation of the luminaries in the heavens. So if you take a look on the second page, you find that there's a problematic sentence in the text. Vayas Elokim et shnei ha'ma'orot hagdolim, et ha'ma'or hagadol lememsheles hayom, ואת המאור הקטון לממשלת הלילה ועץ הכוכבים. God created the two great luminaries, the great luminary to rule during the day, the lesser luminary to rule during the night, and the stars. So the question is, why doesn't it simply say, and God created the great luminary and the small luminary? Why does it say the two great luminaries? So I turned to my students and I said, what do you think? Hands went up. Well, we know the answer. The answer is the moon and the sun were the same size, and the moon complained, and because the moon complained, therefore God caused the moon to be diminished, and that is why it says two great luminaries. I said to them, okay, stop. I said to them, how many of you think or believe that the moon can talk? I said, and this was a more important question. How many of you believe that in order to be an observant Jew, you have to believe the moon can talk? Right? Because that's what we're teaching our kids. And they were aghast. I mean, this is what they had learned. This is what they were told. I was attacking a basic understanding of the text from their perspective. But I said to them then, I want you to understand, we're dealing with this in the safety of a yeshiva university classroom. If you are, and this was before all the trouble on campus, if you were on a campus of another college and someone came up to you and quoted this Midrash and said, do you really believe that? You would be hard-pressed to respond. You would say, yeah, I guess I do. I don't know. So we're demanding a belief in things even more than the things that have to be believed, and creating a real problem. Now, how is this to be understood? So let's start with the Midrash. The Midrash obviously is teaching a lesson. What is a lesson? The lesson is that jealousy, at least on the surface, there are other lessons as well, but the lesson is that jealousy is wrong. One who's jealous is eventually diminished, and therefore the rabbis, seeing this textual problem, basically, turn and say, we're going to take that lesson and we're going to attach it to the text and we're going to teach it so that it will be learned and carried down across the ages in a story sort of form. They are not demanding that we believe the moon can talk. They're not. Now, what's Pshat? Pshat actually is very appropriate, particularly this week, and I'll tell you why. Pshat was driven home to me in a book by a man by the name of Aviezer, last name, I forget the first name, where he wrote about science and Breshit. He said, the moon and the sun, as viewed from Earth, are of the same circumference. In other words, they are, sure, one's brighter than the other, but they are of the same circumference. How do I know that? Because I can have a solar eclipse. I can have the moon blocking the sun's rays. And therefore, isn't it miraculous? Isn't it miraculous that these two bodies, which are so vastly different, and one so much greater than the other, have been put in the heavens just so when we look at them, they are of the same circumference? Eshnei ha'ma'orot ha'gdolim, the two great luminaries, which on some level are equivalent, et ha'ma'or ha'gadol ve'et ha'ma'or ha'katan, the great luminary and the small luminary. Now, again, I believe that's Pshat. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's something that is missed when we immediately go to the Midrash. Let's go to the next one. The next one is really very interesting. And it's also a couple of the Midrashim we're going to learn today are unfortunately appropriate for our time. Vayomer, we're traveling now to the interchange between Cain and Hevel that leads to the murder of Hevel. And here we have a very, very difficult pasuk in the Torah. Pasuk says, Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv. Cain said to Hevel, his brother, Vayehi biyosem basodeh, and it was when they were in the field, Vayokam Cain al Hevel achiv vayargeu. Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. What's missing? What did he say? Right? It's not there. Now, it would be a halbatzor. It would be less of a problem if it would have said, Vayedaber Cain im Hevel. So it'd say that but nowhere in the text does it say, Vayomer, he said, without telling you what it said. It's absent. It's not there. So immediately the Chazal rush in to fill in the gap. And they suggest some things that seem fantastical. Take a look. There are three suggestions that are made. The first suggestion, Rav Huna b'Rav Idi Rabnin, Amru, they said, basically Cain and Hevel said, let's divide up, we're the only ones here, let's divide up the world. Right? You'll have part of the world, I'll have part of the world. And the division, say the rabbis, that they suggested was actually along the lines of a division that exists throughout halacha, which is metaltalin and karka, right? Land and movables. So one of them said, okay, I'll take the land. And the other one said, okay, I'll take the movables. Then one of them turned to the other and said, okay, get off my land. And the other one said, give me back my shirt. And they began to fight and struggle, and Cain kills Hevel. That's suggestion number one. Suggestion number two. Suggestion number two is on the next page and says, what were they arguing about? Beis HaMikdash Bitchumi. No, they were smarter than we had in the first one. They divided land and movables. But what then did they argue about? In whose land would the Beis HaMikdash be built? All right, now it's getting kind of fantastical here, right? I mean, Beis HaMikdash is centuries to come. It's not here. But that's the suggestion. They argued, and Cain kills Hevel. And finally, you have the third suggestion. The third suggestion is that they argued about a woman. That basically there was an extra twin that was born with Cain and Hevel, whatever, and they were arguing about a woman. Now stop. What's going on? What are the rabbis telling me, and why did they come up with these three seemingly unbelievable explanations? Right? They're arguing about karka and metaltal. It gets harder as we go. They're arguing about the Beis Hamikdash. Come on now. Along comes Nechama Leibowitz. She's such a masterful teacher. And she says, take a look at this Midrash and look at it carefully. Across time, what have we killed each other for? We've killed each other for possession. We've killed each other for religion. And we've killed each other for passion. And therefore, what the Midrash is saying is, we don't know what Cain said to Hevel, but it had to be one of these three things, because that's what people fight about. And if you understand the Midrash, as she suggests, it's a powerful and very sad Midrash. Because what it's saying is, we have not moved 1 inch off the killing field since the time of Cain. You know, when the 1900s began, everybody was saying, or a lot of people were saying, it's a new era. We've made tremendous scientific strides, tremendous strides in industry. This era, this century is going to be an era of peace and harmony. Right? Ended up being the most bloodthirsty era in history. We haven't moved off the killing field. And that's frightening to us. And that's what that Midrash is suggesting.
Why, nevertheless, did the Torah have the will by Yom
Okay, now we get to Pshat. All right, that's good. That's the Midrash. All right, he said, but why does the Torah leave out what he said? All right, so I'll throw it out to you. What do you think the answer might be? Because it doesn't matter what he said. It doesn't matter. What the Torah is telling us is, through omission, it's brilliant. There is no possible excuse for what happened yesterday on the bus. I don't care what your taina is. I even use this Midrash. I even use this pasuk. I remember when I spoke to my shul in the aftermath of 9/11. And I said to them, what's the Torah teaching us? That no matter what your taina may be, and maybe Cain had a valid, maybe Hevel was lording it over him because God accepted his sacrifice and Cain was who knows? But whatever what it was doesn't matter. What matters is what he did, and there's no excuse for what he did. And therefore, we're going to tell you, Vayomer, we're going to tell you he said something, he had a taina, and we're going to leave it out. So here's a perfect example. I wish all Midrashim were and Pshat were as beautiful as this one, because it really fits perfectly, both the Midrash and the Pshat. Yes.
My father had the big book on the first one, maybe loud and wrote grandfather.
Okay.
I don't know. And he repeated it at a bris. Is that Katan, you say? Godogi, yeah. So can you say, does anybody say, I don't know where my father got this from, that the two luminaries are just different? One is, you could say that Katan, when you're young, you want your values of your parents to be reflected. And then Godogi, as you get older, you want to be like the sun, you want to stand alone, you want to be powerful.
I've heard that Dvar Torah. It's a beautiful Dvar Torah. It's a beautiful Dvar Torah, because we say Zeh HaKatan Gadol Yeh. It's referring to the child now who's like the moon should somehow become like the sun. It's very pretty, very pretty. Is it Pshat? No, but it's very pretty. And it's no, and it's.
And it is Pshat, because the thing that which is reflected is not as powerful.
But it's
so they're both luminaries.
Right, but it's not explaining why the text says the two great luminaries, the large and the small. Why are they both great luminaries? Why is it that extra?
They're both important.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Could be. You're making a good case. You're making a good case. All right. Now, I want to go to a couple of other very, very small examples, and then to a Pshat and Kain Hemel, as we said, and it doesn't matter what he said. That the Torah deliberately leaves out the substance of what he said, because the Torah is teaching us that it doesn't matter what he said. Well, no matter what he said, no matter what his taina was, there's no excuse for what happened. Right. Okay. And the Torah couldn't have told us that in a better way. In other words, it's so brilliant, because what the Torah does is the Torah says he said something. There was a taina, but we're not going to tell you what it is, because it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Possession, religion, what's the third one?
Passion.
Women.
Passion. Yes. All right. One more question, then we'll move on. Yes. I am not aware of any other case in the Torah where the Torah says Vayomer and does not tell you what was said. This is the only case that I'm aware of. There may be, but I'm not aware of it. Okay. Now, let's go to a couple of others that I think are again important for us as well. Let's take a look at Lot and Avram as they travel together. So, again, we'll see that this is unfortunately very, very appropriate for the time. Vayiriv, Lot and Avraham and their shepherds and their cattle are all traveling together. And the Torah says, Vayiriv bein roe miknei Avram, uvein roe miknei Lot. There was a fight. Va'knani va'prizi oz yoshev ba'aretz. There was a fight between the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Abraham, and the Knanim and the Prizim then were living in the land. Now, what does this have to do with the Brooklyn Bridge? Well, in other words, what's the association with this of the second half of the sentence with the first? So Rashi quotes a Midrash, which may be close to Pshat, but it's still Midrashic. It's not clear. And then I'll tell you a Sforno, which I think is closer to Pshat. Rashi says, and it's a famous Midrash, that what they were arguing about was that the shepherds of Lot were allowing their flocks to graze on property belonging to the Knanim and the Prizim. Right? And they were saying, basically, God's giving us the land. And Avram's shepherds were saying, no, we don't have it yet. It still belongs to them. And that's the connection between the second part of the sentence and the first. So it's Midrashic, but close to Pshat. The Sforno says something I think even more beautiful. Basically, what the Sforno says is as follows. There was an argument and a reeve and a terrible argument split within the camp of Avraham and Lot. At the time that was happening, they were surrounded by aliens. They were surrounded by others who were looking at them, who were watching them, and who were basically saying they can't get along with each other. They're never going to get along with us. Take one step further, they can't get along with each other. It's a perfect time to attack. So now look at that pasuk, and it speaks to us, right? There was a riv between Lot, right? An inner dimension of turmoil, and nothing changes, right? Nothing new under the sun. We become vulnerable when we can't get along with each other. And that's problematic. All right, let's go on. We're going to take another look now with this. Now, this one's a very interesting one, I think. We're going to go to the Akedah. All right, and here Rashi quotes Midrash that's Midrash, and I think because he's having a difficulty with the text. What does the Midrash say? What does the Torah say? Where the introduction to the Akedah reads as follows. Vayihi achar hadvorim ho'ela. It was after these things. Ve'elokim nisa es Avraham. Vayomer elav Avraham. Vayomer ineni. Now, what's problematic in that sentence? Vayihi achar hadvorim ho'ela. I've asked you this before. Does the Torah follow chronological order? Ah, sure does. It follows chronological order except when it doesn't. What do I mean by that? All right? As a rule, the Torah follows chronological order, right? Avram precedes Yitzchak, Sarah precedes Rivka, right? Follows chronological order. In fact, there are those who say, including the Ramban, that it's never out of order. There are some commentaries who say, I can't understand the flow of the text as it's written. Ein muktam u'mucha bar Torah. I guess this must have happened before. And that's the way they understand the text. But it's only in a few sections. But I asked you that question and got your answer because I wanted to show you how you learned Chumash. How we learned, how I learned it, right? I grew up thinking there's no order to what do you mean there's no order to the text? The text follows a chronological order, except in unusual circumstances when some commentaries say it doesn't. And that's what we need to understand. So if that's the case, if the Torah follows chronological order, what's the problem with this pasuk? Vayiyachar hadvarim. Why does the Torah ever have to say to me, it was after these things, right? Why does the Torah ever have to say it? So, I'm sorry? Okay, we're going to talk. All right, now let's take a look at what Rashi says. Here Rashi goes straight to Midrash, and a Midrash which veers totally from the Pshat. Rashi says, if you take a look at the next page, that the word dvarim in this case does not mean things, it was after these things, but rather diburim. It was after these statements. And says Rashi, what were the diburim? Two possibilities. And he's quoting Midrash. One possibility is that Satan said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avram made a party when the son was born and didn't even offer a korban to you. So Hashem says to him, no, you're going to see how willing he'll be to give a real korban. And that led to the Akedah. Second possibility is that Shmuel was saying to Yitzchak, you think that you're so good, you had a bris in 8 days. I had a bris when I was 12 years old. I'm much better than you, right? I was willing. So along comes Hashem and says, we'll see what Yitzchak is willing to give up. And that'll answer Ishmael. Now, that is Midrashic. That the Torah says, Vayiyachar hadvarim ha'eleh. The simple explanation is after these things. So why does the Torah ever say that phrase? So the Rashbam, as others, says very simply, every time the Torah says, Vayiyachar hadvarim ha'eleh, or Vayiyacharei hadvarim ha'eleh, there is a connection between what just happened and what's about to happen. It's not just telling me this happened after, it's telling me that this happened at least partially because of what preceded it. Which would mean, according to the Rashbam, that I'd have to take a look at what precedes the Akedah and find a connection to the Akedah. All right. Well, what precedes the Akedah? Take a look at page number 4. Does anyone know? Very good. Correct. If you take a look at page 4, number 4, and it's just a small section of it, Vayhi ba'es hahu, or he, Vayomer Avimelech ufi chol sar tzvo el Avraham, le'mor elukim imcha chol asher toseh. We see God is with you. Avimelech and his entourage comes to Avram. We see God's with you. V'yata yishava li be'elokim hino im tishkor li ulanini ulanechti. I want you to swear, I want you to make a bris, a covenant, that you will not deal falsely with me or with my children or my grandchildren. And this is, and he's asking, by the way, and it's important, as the paragraph develops, they create a bris, which is a real covenant, real bris. Now, what's the connection between that and the Akedah? The Rashbam is basically telling us that there has to be a connection. So the Rashbam offers one that I think is very, very powerful. And it's revolutionary because it explains on some level why the Akedah occurs. Says the Rashbam, take a look, and I want you to see his words. Take a look at the bottom of page 4. Achar hadvarim shekoras Avram bris leElimelech lo ulenino ulenechto shel Avraham. Following the bris, the covenant that Avram made with the likes of Avimelech. By the way, Avimelech is a sort of an interesting character in the text. He's not evil, but he's not particularly good. He's sort of a king that allows things to happen and claims he doesn't know they happened. All right, but anyway, because that emerges here too, because the first thing that Avram says to you is, why did you steal my wells? And Avimelech says, I didn't do anything. I didn't know about it. Whatever. You should know about it. Anyway, after you created a covenant with Avimelech for you and your children and your grandchildren, take a look at the next page. Vo'elokim nisa es Avraham, page number 5, the top of the page, the underlined section. Kantaro v'tza'aro. God responded to that bris by creating a very, very frightening reality for Avraham. He basically is punishing him. Why? Klomar, nitga'esa babin shenasati lecha lechros bris beinechem uveinechem. You were willing, nisga'eh means you dealt haughtily with your child that I gave to you by endangering him with a bris with Avimelech intergenerationally. Va'atol lech v'ha'aleu le'olah. Now take that child that you endangered and offer him up on the mountain. V'urei ma ho'ilah krisot bris shelcha. And now you'll know what that bris really was. What the value of that bris was. Now what's happening here? The Rashbam is suggesting, because we really have a problem when it comes to the Akedah and the concept of nisayon in general. And there are all sorts of explanations as to why God tests man. But in this particular case, the Rashbam offers yet another explanation. I don't think he denies all the others, but he says there is something happening here that God is responding to. And if you go back up, actually, you find a very interesting pattern in the text around that leads to the Akedah. It's a pattern where Avraham has to deal with the outside world and has to retreat from the outside world, and then has to deal with the outside world and has to retreat from the outside world. And what's that pattern creating? It's creating the balance that we've had to have throughout our history, which is we live in the world and we have to know where to draw the line. We have to know where we can't step over the line. If we step over the line, then we endanger ourselves, we endanger our children. We have to know what we can accept from an outside culture and what we can't. Avraham, according to the Rashbam, steps over the line here. By creating that covenant with Avimelech, he endangers Yitzchak and his progeny, and the balance is off kilter, and Hashem has to respond. And the Rashbam says, so this again becomes very relevant for us, because I'm working on a book now about the cycle of the year, and one of the essays that I have is that the names of the months of the year, where do they come from? according to most explaining a comment in the Gemara that says they were brought back from Babylon, right? Most commentaries say these were Babylonian names that we adopted. Now, wait a minute. We're calling the months of our year across perpetuity by the names that were called by a country that enslaved us, defeated us, burnt the temple, sent us into exile. Why are we doing that? So I ask you something. Is it true that we, as we go through history, are affected by the world around us? Are we changed by the world around us? Right? Take a look on our day when we finally see Jews across the world, Ashkenazim, Sfardim, Glitzianas, Litvaks. What is all that? That's all baggage. That's all baggage that we picked up. Walk the street here in Yerushalayim and you'll see so many different Jews of so many different backgrounds, of so many different costumes. And basically, we pick up things from the world around us. But, and this is where the balance comes in, we have to know where we have to stop. We have to know where this, and it becomes even more problematic in our day when the outside world invades our homes and invades our children's world, and things are coming in that you just have to say no to. Yes. What was wrong? Okay. The actual brit was that they would have they would treat each other with respect. But basically, what he was saying is, you have rights and I have rights. And one of the commentaries in the Chazal says basically that Avram was destined to get the land from Avimelech. He should never have made a bris, basically saying, you have the rights. But also, I think also it was to make a covenant with someone like Avimelech is problematic, not just in terms of the land. It's problematic because you don't accept what Avimelech stands for. Yes.
That explains the first by the Acharei Hetebrima. There's the second one right after the Akedah. It's again by the Acharei Hetebrima. And I heard from Rabbi Moshe Brown in Poland, a beautiful thing again.
Okay. All right. Good. I'm listening.
That after the Akedah, you saw that the DNA changed, that you had this Mesilas Nefesh, the dye of Kiddush Hashem was put into us through Yitzchak, and that's why the Acharei had to bring. After the Akedah, this is what enabled when Rabbi Brown showed us all the tragedies from the Holocaust in Poland. This is what they said. Interesting.
It's also appropriate for this. It's also appropriate for this Shabbos because this Shabbos has the Tochacha. This Shabbos we read frightening prophetic curses that will ensue to the Israelites, to the Jews, based on our failures. All right, take a look now, though. I'm going to give you a bonus Pshat. What I mean by that is we're going to take a look at another text very quickly because we're running out of time. And I want to show you how, again, a reading of the text makes so much difference. This is the next generation, and I'll take questions afterwards. This is the next generation. Yitzchak. What happens? Take a look. Avimelech holach elav migror. Avimelech comes with his entourage, right? Vayomer aleim, Vayomer aleim Yitzchak. Yitzchak says, why have you come to me? Senei semoti, you hated me, and you sent me from you? And they answer, oh, no, we see that God is with you. And now let there be an agreement between us. V'nichras bris, let's make a covenant. If you will deal with us falsely, just like we did not harm you and sent you away in peace. Okay, so what's going on here? First of all, one of the things you see in Yitzchak's life is it repeats many of the things that happened in Avram's life, happen in Yitzchak's life.
Same Avimelech?
Not clear. Avimelech, like Paro, could well have been the title. But what's the first thing we see? Avimelech's coming to Yitzchak. What's the first thing we see? What happened to your intergenerational bris, right? You just made a comment. If it's you or your father or grandfather, and now you have to make another one. What? So that's issue number one. But now, take a look at what Yitzchak says and what Avimelech says. Are they disagreeing about the facts? And the answer is no. Yitzchak said, you sent me from you, you chased me out of your land. And Avimelech says, we sent you in peace. They're not disagreeing about the facts. What are they disagreeing about? The definition of peace, right? That's what they're disagreeing about. Basically, Avimelech is saying, peace means we won't kill you. We may exile you, we may whatever, but we won't kill you. And along comes Yitzchak and says, no, you sent me out, you hate me. Now, so there is a fundamental difference between Yitzchak and Avimelech as the way you define peace. What's the next thing that happens? Next thing that happens is Vayas lohem mishteh, vayochlu vayishtu. Yitzchak stops talking. The discussion stops, and he throws a party. Why? First of all, it's dangerous. There's nothing to talk about. When you are facing someone who sees the world so absolutely differently than you do, as we know, there's no conversation. So Yitzchak says, I'm not going to make a bris with him. I'm not going to make a covenant with him. I'll make some agreements to make us feel better, so he won't kill me. But the fact is that we're negotiations are over. No negotiations. And then what does it say at the end? And this is where the Torah has such beautiful irony. Vayashkemu vaboker, after this party, vayishavu ish liachiv. They swore to each other, but they did not make a bris. It doesn't appear the way it did with Avraham. And then vayishalchem Yitzchak vayelchu me'ito b'shalom. What does he do? Exactly what they did to him. And they are leaving in their definition of peace. In other words, he's basically saying, all right, that I can't, nothing to talk about, nothing to negotiate, we're not going to make a real... And by the way, Chazal, who come down on Avraham for the creation of the bris with Avimelech, are silent when it comes to this episode. They don't criticize Yitzchak. And if you learn the text carefully, it's clear why. Because Yitzchak understands that you can't make a covenant with Avimelech. Okay, so what? Yes.
So we go into Israel. They say they want to kill every single one of us and want the whole land from the river to the sea.
We are not.
And we're busy.
I'm trying. There were numerous things we said in this class that absolutely mirror exactly what's happening in our world. Numerous things we said. And that again, all right, so I hope that I've made my case that Midrash is beautiful and should be understood as Midrash, and Pshat is beautiful and should be taught as Pshat. And that's the way we should start. We should start with the Pshat and then go to the Midrash. Yes?
Abraham has the right to make a bris with Avimelech.
According to the Chazal, no. That's right. According to Chazal, he had no right to make a bris with Avimelech because eventually Avimelech was going to have land that Avram was supposed to get, etc., etc. He should not have made the bris. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you.
I always struggle between the problem of the authority of the Midrashim, because we have Torah Sheba'al Peh, which we have to accept as coming
Right.
traditionally from